The PlayStation 2 has to be without a doubt one of the greatest platforms for racing games ever in the video game industry. They will provide some of the greatest experiences that you could possibly have. But in saying that, there are also games out there that didn't hit the mark in the way that they could have done. You have everything from budget to high quality entries, all offering very different experiences to say the least, with a lot of them being a lot better than you would expect. So if we take a look at Flatout, that released in 2004 on the system, along with the Xbox, the Windows PC, and even later in 2010 on the Nintendo Wii, this would be one of those unique hidden gems really on the system. Although the reviews were mixed or average at best when the game first released, but it definitely offered some interesting qualities that took a lot of reference from old classic games like Destruction Derby 1 and 2 on the original PlayStation and other car combat games of a similar caliber, but added in some very unique elements that you really wouldn't get anywhere else for the time, and in a way that it stood out amongst anything else that was really seen, as the game had great use of handling physics and even gameplay mechanics where everything felt real to a degree that when you were driving, if you hit a bump in the road or if you hit something that was on the track, it would affect the physics or handling aesthetics of the vehicle itself. But one of the funniest elements, even regardless of all the different modes, gameplay, death matches, is the addition of being able to project the driver through the windscreen upon crashing, or if you make a bad crash, the driver will be flung from the car. And in many cases there's some of the modes where you have to literally do that, where you have to crash into something and try to fling the driver as far as you possibly can in order to gain the longest distance to gain the most amount of points. It almost acts like an Olympic event to a degree, but in a more funnier and more dangerous way. But the level of detail, and even with the interest in damage physics, would be quite similar to games like Burnout, as the level of detail in terms of the impact and the crashes available are really extreme and just crazy. But the game is fast paced, it's frantic, it's a lot of fun and can be quite addictive. The handling physics are really good, although they do have different characteristics depending on different vehicle types. I find with these type of games in particular, when you're driving in the more small or hot hatch style cars, the handling can be a little bit more finicky and tricky to get used to. But yet, when you drive faster paced cars, more like with the muscle cars, everything's a lot more balanced and you feel like you do have a lot more control. Even though you have greater speeds at which to control the car at, you feel like that you have more say in how the car handles. You don't really get that as much with the smaller cars, and that is more noticeable with the sequel, which I did play as well, and I will cover that in a future video. I found that the sequel was even harder to take control of smaller cars. If anything, between the two games, if you compare them side by side, I think the handling physics, I don't know, just in my opinion, in the first game is just better and easier to get into. And I find that this game series in general, because I had quite a number of sequels that came out at a later stage, I even have the fourth game, which I do have on my PlayStation 4, and while it's a decent game to a degree, I didn't enjoy it the same way as I enjoyed the first game. I felt a lot of it felt repetitive and lackluster, plus the one element that is more prevalent in the sequels compared to the first game, while it is there to a degree, is the use of rubber banding techniques, which can be quite aggressive, more so in the sequels than in the first game, which is kind of ironic really when you think about it, because at least with this original game here, you can win races through skill, whereas with the sequels it just falls down to pure luck, which does add to the frustration, because that's the one thing I don't like about video games or racing games in particular. If you're going to win a race, you like to be able to win it through sheer skill and determination and just being able to have the right lines and not making any mistakes. It shouldn't be a case of having to rely on pure luck, making sure that the computer AI doesn't suddenly get a massive boost of speed and just sit past you at the finish line, which they can do, and it does happen all the time. I know they try to do it in a cheap tactic to make the game more challenging, but it just really dilutes the experience. You want to get a sense of achievement from your victory, not something that should be just down to pure luck. Now, that's just my take on it. I know that not everybody may agree with that, but I find that to be a very frustrating element with those type of games, or those type of qualities within games. But luckily enough, the first Flatout game, it isn't as aggressive as you may think. If anything, it presents enough of a challenge that even when you're playing with the lesser powered cars, you can still bring it to the bigger cars and have a really good race. And you'll see that in the replays, when if you watch back, you can see where you went right and you can see where you went wrong, and it just makes the whole experience a lot more engaging and enthusiastic. You really feel like a good driver when you're playing the game if you've done a good job, if you've won the race. But even looking back, my first experience with the first game in the series wasn't on the PlayStation 2 itself, it was on the PC. I remember at that point I was in college and I was flat out playing a load of PC games, but I was always interested in not just playing like different types of genres like action shooters, first person shooters and the like. I've always been a massive fan of racing games, so once I kind of got used to being able to play racing games on PCs, I often would find a way to try and get a few of them if I could. And I remember seeing Flatout, I think on one of the websites, I think it was play.com, I think it would have been at that time when that was still on the go, and I was intrigued by it. I would usually always look at the screenshots, very similar if you walked into a game shop and you would look at the case, you take it off the shelf and you'd look at the back end of the case and see any of the screens and have a look and see what the game looked like, and that usually would be the selling point to make a decision for you or not. And I often find by looking at this game, because graphically for its time it is very very good, if anything for 2004 it was one of the best looking racing games on any platform. But I have to say, even though I didn't have all that powerful of a PC at the time, the game still ran fairly well. I didn't really have any issues with the game crashing or feeling laggy at all. It still ran decently enough, and with that I was also able to enjoy the experience a lot more, and I found it to be very very good. So even getting to play it on the PlayStation, it was just bringing back more of the same experience, and if anything it was just as equally as enjoyable on the console format. Graphically it's very very good. The controls, while they can be a bit sensitive at times, it takes a bit of getting used to, but when you do master it you will have a good experience. It's a really good solid all round game, and if you like crashing cars and causing devastation you will have a blast with this game. To be truthfully honest, out of all of the games that was released for all of the systems, even some of the spin-offs on other mobile devices and so forth, the original game in the series to me is still the best game out of all of them. I don't know, the sequels, even though they were okay to a degree, just felt like they were getting worse. They were trying to add in things that really just did not work, whereas the first game I think got it right the first time around, and it should have stayed like that with the future sequels, but unfortunately for whatever reason that didn't happen. But they're still worth trying out. But if you want to play the best game in the series, in my opinion, play the first game. It's a very good solid all round racer, and arguably one of the better racers on the PlayStation 2. With that being said, however, I would love to know your thoughts on this game. What do you think of it overall? Would this be your favourite game in the series like myself, or would you prefer some of the other games that were available? It will be interesting to hear your thoughts on this and what you think of it, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around more racing games like this that also saw a release on the console, then I've covered a load of them previously in this playlist, which you can check out right here.